two roads diverged in a yellow wood. The one I took was less traveled by, and that has made all of the difference. How many of us can go back to a moment that it really made a difference? Being in that liminal space, that in-between space, the in-between things, the in-between knowing, what a fantastic place to be in. Not always. Let me tell you a story about the three elderly sisters who lived together. The first one was in the doorway of the upstairs bathroom, with one foot in the bathroom and one foot in the hallway, and she called down to her sisters and asked, "Sisters, was I going in or out of the bathroom?" Well, the middle sister shook her head and went up the stairs and got to the middle landing, and she called out, "Sisters, was I going up the stairs or coming down?" The younger sister, sitting at the table, said to herself as she headed up to check on her sisters, "Thank goodness I'm not like my sisters yet. Knock on wood." "Hold on, sisters, someone's at the door." So, how many times have we found ourselves in the proverbial doorway or landing, not sure if we want to step in or step back, go up or come back down? How many times do we get distracted from moving into a certain direction by those knocks on the doors that want to get in the way of our focus? A few years ago, Forbes magazine wrote about liminal moments, these in-between times, the awkward times of indecision and unknowingness. They're often, but not always, unplanned. Graduation from school, moving to a new town, changing or losing a job. As we heard today, losing a loved one and the anniversary of losing a loved one. These are liminal times. For younger people, going from childhood to adolescence, going through puberty, going to becoming a girl to a young lady, these awkward times where people are not always friendly to you or supportive in your liminal moments. Preparing for death, getting ready to retire, which hopefully are not the same thing. Time is different during a liminal moment, and that moment can be a day, months, or longer. A recent article from the Witch's Lore website entitled Liminal Spaces, Portals to the Spirit World and Beyond said, quote, "On a spiritual level, a liminal space is a threshold that connects two realms, often thought to be a doorway to the other world. It represents emotional, psychological, and spiritual transitions, serving as a catalyst for growth and reflection." So, if any of you have been familiar with hospice or the work in the death and dying process, there's called the veil, the liminal moments. We didn't realize this originally with my father-in-law, but he would be staring past us, and Kelly finally said, what are you staring at? And it would be his mom or his dad or predeceased brother, and he would see them in the room. And so whatever your belief system, whether that was his mind or a certain reality, did not make a difference. It was real to Jack. And in that veil, there was a comfortness that he was going to a new time of exploration. And as you said, whatever that exploration is the liminal moment that we're moving toward. The article went on to say that the uncertainty is also a potential for an opportunity for profound personal growth. This innate craving for certainty that we all have highlights the ambiguity and the paradox of the liminal time, because what it means to be human is to be liminal. While we live in the present moment is between two moments. It's also in between our reality and the transcendent or the divine, however you call the bigger picture beyond self. If we imagine every day of our journey, before and after a liminal moment, and all of the person's journey afterwards. In other words, think of the time before the liminal moment you thought of and the time after. What was the percentage of the time that you spent in that liminal moment or space? In the poem by Robert Frost, the metaphor of the fork in the road doesn't give us a specific time frame. So we can't determine that by the poem, but we can say that it was sufficient time for a thoughtful process, to be aware, to vision distinct options, to discern, and, albeit hesitant or slightly uncomfortable, to make an intentional choice, to make an option, even though there's no guarantee of the result, because we're going into the unknown. So liminal spaces can be short-term, but life-changing. Theologian Richard Rohr tells us that the liminal space is that inner state and sometimes the outer situation where we begin to think and act in new ways. Most people came to the Unitarian Universalist Church because they were in liminal space. In other words, they were leaving something. Some of us were born into the Unitarian Universalist Church. I'm thinking Lynn might have, with your grandfather, had a whole history of that. But and most of our RE teachers, Bridget and Mike Beck and the Rojos, they all were raised in the Unitarian faith. But most of us were in another space, and we needed something different. And for some people, the Unitarian Universalist Church is liminal. It actually, they move to another place, or they don't quite stay in any place. And they just kind of take that step back to say, I don't really want to be in anything right now. And that's fine. And then other people, this liminal space becomes that next step for you. And it doesn't make it easy, because when we say that we are, what I think, besides the principle of the welcoming, that the inherent dignity and worth of every human being, that the second principle that's important to me is the free and responsible search for truth and meaning. So that continues to be in that space because we continue to grow. So he talks about, Richard Rohr talks about the fact that liminal space is where we are most teachable, because we're humbled in a space that there's unknowing. So instead of ego confirmation, we can struggle with the hidden side of things, and we can deal with the so-called normalcy and move that into creative questions. And I think he talked about many spiritual giants like St. Francis, Julian of Norwich, Dorothy Day, Mahatma Gandhi. They tried to live their whole lives in permanent liminality, on the edge or periphery of dominant culture. I think to some degree Unitarian Universalists find themselves in that, not necessarily comfortably, but he says this is that in-place which is free of illusions and what he calls false payoffs. In other words, it deals with truths that sometimes dominant cultures kind of overlook or underrepresent. So when we are invited to discover and live from broader perspectives and with much deeper seeing, a lot of our community and country are not necessarily interested in that. And in fact, persecute those who want to make that next step. And David Keel talks about that in his sermon a couple of weeks ago, the tribal step of human development, that what's most important is tribal normalcy, and that when you go outside the norm, you get everybody in trouble. And there certainly was a time where that might have been important. And but we have grown beyond that. So although I'm not anywhere near those prophets or mystics, I do try to live outside of the black and white and be comfortable in that gray of liminal space. I think as minister, I have to be. And that's important. It's not easy, but it's important, because my space is to be involved in your space. And so that trying to get out of patterns that were successful but are no longer successful is not easy. And to be called to something that will make us different. And that something could be when you're 5 years old and going into kindergarten, and when you're 75 years old, trying to figure out the next step. Some of you remember Mavis. When Mavis was like 89 years old, she decided she wanted to play the trombone. And, but she also, when she turned 80, decided she wanted to write poetry. And so she was writing poetry and learning the trombone. What she learned was that she didn't have the air power to do the trombone. So that she gave up. But the poetry she could do. And so the liminal space and times of our transformation goes from literally kindergarten right through. The irony is that liminal space doesn't have to be difficult, but it is challenging. And it's rewarding. And the other thing that Richard Rohr said is that you discover there is another center of the universe. And it's not me. Don't tell Kelly that. Okay. So this is what he calls the enchanted universe, the liminal space. Now, there's two women experts that I want to talk about. New York mindset expert Kirsten Franklin. She's a transformation coach, and she works with professional athletes. That's I know her, but she also works with high-level executives. And a transitions expert, Melissa Cohen, who's a licensed clinical social worker in New York, and she's the founder of the mental wellness website, A Redefined You. They both give us tips on navigating through the liminal moments of your life. Now, I say that because we live in our country in liminal moment right now. Every day is change. It's not easy, and we don't control 99.9% of that. What we do control, a couple things. So, let's talk about some of these things that they give us. One, use it as a healthy way to ask why not instead of what if. If we ask ourselves why not and focus on the positive outcomes, we can avoid catastrophizing. What ifs is like, oh, what if this happens? Well, what if it doesn't? Or what if it does? If you say why not, say, okay, maybe we can do something different. Meditation. Meditation is very important. It's a weird magic trick, but I really truly believe that if we just take time to breathe, and I will tell you, sometimes we just need to count. In other words, how can we take out the world static? You don't. But if you just go up to 10 and down to 10, it does start to refocus our mind. As some of you know, I just like to look up in the morning and look at the clouds in the sky. It helps to reframe my center away from me. Practice acceptance and being patient. The more you accept where you're at and don't fight it, the easier it will be. There's things that we can change. Not many. But we can change some things. We're dealing with a refugee crisis now in the United States where people who have legal status are now having that status turned to an illegal status and told they have to leave within about 30 days by the end of April. And so that's a significant time in their life and could be very tragic. So we understand that we've got to understand where we are and being in that present moment. It is not easy. We can't accept that. We have taken on one of our members who's an Afghan family that most of you know, and we know we can help. We've taken on helping with the English classes and the citizenship classes with Lutheran Social Services and Catholic Charities. So we can do our part of things we can control. And there's other things that we can help influence, even if we don't control those. And those are important. But understanding that is important. Remembering that there's transformation with the process. So they say dig deep to remember other challenging times in your life and what you did to succeed in those situations. Maybe some of the tools you have used in the past will apply to the present. I have a quote that I love. It's an unknown author, and it says, on particularly rough days when I am sure I can't possibly endure, I like to remind myself that my track record for getting through bad days so far is 100%. And that's pretty good. So, can't predict the future, but let's go by the past experience. And those past experiences of personal resiliency can help us create a foundation to build on this current seminal time. And then it says write things down. Sometimes when you write things down, it makes things less big. You know, like, oh, this is terrible. But when you write down, you say, okay, these are things, it might become more manageable. And the other thing is it gives you a baseline. And say, yesterday I was worried about this, but actually it was okay, you know, or it wasn't. And it gives you that baseline to say, okay, but I survived yesterday. So they do say, even if you don't do a journal, just writing down points that are your issues. Getting it down on paper also helps emotionally, mentally, to relieve it, because you're carrying it in your head. It's a lot to carry in your head. You write it down, and you can let it go a little bit and say, yes, I'm not going to forget that. It's here. And then use words that enhance, not detract. If you have a negative statement, like, for example, I can't do something, or I won't, or I'm unable, or I'm scared, maybe look forward to, I look forward to it, or I like it, or I'm open to it. I think those are some of the things that we can use for ourselves to help us reframe the time we're in. And then one of the things they mentioned is going 7 levels deep. So this is a hard thing. I was actually at a retreat where you had to do this. You keep asking yourself why until you get to the bottom of what's causing your uneasiness. And for me, it was the question was, what do you want to do in the future? And you had to say what you wanted to do. And then they say, okay, what else do you want to do in the future? And then you had to say, and then what else you want to do in the future? And then they would say, okay, what are you scared of? Okay, you know, what is your, you know, angst? And they'd say, okay, what else is your angst? And you had to get to 7, which wasn't all that easy. But it was really good. And again, focus on what we can control. So if you think you're going to do things because of what others think about you, or you think that other people should do things, that's tough, because you're not going to change another person. You can influence them, and you can influence the decision, and we do. For example, with our work with eye care, we help influence decisions. Sometimes we can't change it, but we can influence it. So, as a Unitarian Universalist, whether you're a mystic, a humanist, liminal times, liminal spaces are where our spiritual and humanist mystical work is done. It is when and where that veil between this world and the transcendent, the bigger picture, or the other world, thins. As we deepen our work, we come to recognize these liminal times and these spaces at the Unitarian Universalist Church of Jacksonville will help us to understand ourselves, our congregation, and the world. And I really do believe, however we think of soul, whether it's the spirit, the energy, the heart, the core of who we are, the great work of the soul is often done in the liminal time. Now, this concept goes back to ancient times. Dr. Deanne Corey, a priestess, shares the story of the goddess, and I may say this wrong. Crystal, you may know. Hecate? Oh, I was going to say, Karen, I was going to ask you earlier. Hecate, yes, the great goddess of the 3 ways, bridging earth, sea, and sky. She had a big job. And she did that as people traveled between 3 worlds. She did that with the gods. She did it with humans as well. Her roles within the 3 worlds were important. But Dr. Corey says her role as the goddess who bridges these worlds is far more important. Throughout our lives, we are faced with a multitude of liminal moments, those thresholds over which we must step in order to move forward. Okay, here's the open secret that we all know as Unitarian Universalists. How much of our life is liminal space? All of it. You have a bookend, 2 bookends. The day you were born, the day you die. Everything in the middle is the liminal space we live in. We lead the life between those bookends. And for Unitarian Universalists, we hold different spiritual beliefs about what happened before and what will happen after, but we really focus on the here and now of living in this world. So our principle of a responsible search for truth and meaning is always liminal. As I mentioned, it's always changing, growing, pruning, adding to our wisdom and knowledge about life. And I will go back. Between 5 years old and 10 years old, there will be major changes of our belief systems. And it continues to go forward. So, I don't want to be Pollyanna about this. Many of us are concerned with all the changes going on in our state, nation, and the world. They are disconcerting, especially for those losing employment, losing their homes, their legal residency. And I don't diminish the impact, often negative, at least in the near term, that the liminal time can have on our lives. And this is why it's important that the other open secret of the bigger picture is something we know as Unitarian Universalists. Sometimes David Keel asks the question, is the universe a friendly place? Or is it something we need to be scared of? And it actually affects how we lead our lives, right? I, who am not a good mystic like David, tend to think somewhat agnostically about that question. But I do think that the secret is that the universe is in itself always in a liminal space. It's always changing. It's always growing. There's always death and new birth. So we're here. That's the blessing that we're in. That's the miracle to be in that. So I say, if the universe brought us here into its liminal space, we should get on the ride. What's the other option? Be scared of the ride? Anybody that's been on a roller coaster? And I'm not saying you have to get on the roller coaster, okay? The ride sometimes is a roller coaster, but often it's a ride that's enjoyable. It has its difficulties. It has its hardships. It is liminal because life always is change. That's the story of life. So as Unitarian Universalists, we understand that, where we are in this picture between 2 points. All of our life is liminal. Some people love religion because it gives them the answer, and by gosh, from 5 years old to the rest of their life, they have that answer until they die. Oh, wouldn't that be good? I'm going back. So we don't believe that. But it makes it a little bit harder. And that's okay, because that's the ride we're on. So I would like to just say, let's be wise. Let's calm down. Lower our own anxiety, because it doesn't help anybody else. Find ways to express our values. That's important. Our outlets, how we can support those suffering during this particular liminal time, and focus on what we can control. I want to finish with this blessing adapted from theologian Jan Richardson. She says, on each threshold, wisdom. On every doorway, love. Through every entry, grace. With each beginning, peace. And I truly believe that Unitarian Universalists believe that. We want wisdom. We don't want superficiality that is not wise. We do things in love. And we do things, what I say, tough love. It's not, oh, because I love you, I'm not going to say this. I'll say it respectfully, but I say it in love. We do it through grace. We understand that we did not earn our way to be born. Someone else earned their way to birth us, but we did not earn our way to be born. It is a graced moment. And to be in peace, primarily inner peace. When I walk in here, and I know Rick's not the only one, but when I walk in here to the garden, as the garden walks into my right, it is an instant inner peace moment, isn't it? Looking out at there is inner peace. And honestly, seeing the elevator shaft is peaceful to me. She goes on to say, when there is no path, or when there is no way, no path, no road made plain, may there be wise ones who inspire you to see where the way could begin. The wise ones for me are, again, the people around the room here who offer their opinions, our boards, the people who serve in the different aspects of our church. They're wise to me. May you go into the complicated places with courage and with wisdom, in connection with the universe, God, oneness, your higher power, as you understand it to be, who meets you there. In other words, the liminal moment is not a moment in isolation. It's a moment in connectedness. Whether you connect to yourself, whether you connect to a loved one, whether you connect to a departed, whether you connect to a higher power, that person is ready to meet you there. Don't go through liminal space alone. So let us live, she concludes, on the threshold as threshold and find comfort there. I thank you. And I when I thought about this, I truly mean this. As much as you can, with all the difficulties and challenges that we face as a small congregation in this big city of Jacksonville, let's take time to enjoy this liminal ride that we call life. Thank you.